get going. All
Yeah.
right. Hello and welcome to the second episode of the Game Factory podcast. Once again, I'm joined by Mike Bithell and Andrew Smith.
Hello.
Today, we are going to be talking about sort of the phases of games development. I kind of found it really surprising when I got into games of, I guess, how the process works and why there are the phases that we have, when you can throw them away, so on and so forth. But I wanted to start off with the first phase, which is ideas. So whenever I introduce myself to someone as a game maker, they usually have, one of a few reactions. Their first is, do you play games all day? The second is, did you make GTA? And the third one is, I have this game idea. What can I do with it?
Yes. And can I give you $1 million?
So yeah, let's sort of talk about game ideas. And I don't know how to.
Sorry.
So yeah, I guess it's kind of relevant. Of just like one of the common answers I actually do give is, if you have the money to make it, then you can make it and see how it does. But if you don't, it's your game idea is kind of useless if you can't actually do anything with it. And I sort of wanted to talk about, I guess, recently both of you released games. Can you talk a little bit about, when you started thinking about, Volume, for example, Mike? When did you start thinking about it? How long did you develop the idea for, and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, in my case, Volume, I knew I wanted to make a stealth game. So stealth games in general were in my head for years and years and years since I was a teenager. But in terms of like, let's actually do this, and what are the specific ideas for this game? Weirdly, most of my ideas happened during the boring bits of the previous project. So with this, it was finishing off Thomas Was Alone. I started bouncing ideas around, and kind of decided, hey, if Thomas Was Alone sells a few copies, I'll make Volume. That'll be fun. And then it's weird because now this obviously Volume's been out now for a couple of months, so we're getting started on a bunch of different ideas, and similarly they're things that I started thinking about or prototyping while we were in crunch on Volume, just as something else to do during those very stressful last few months of finishing a game. But yeah, usually I have ideas when I'm bored. That's usually how it works for me.
Cool. What about you and Tango Fiesta?
Well, infamously, the game came from a game jam run by Eurogamer and sponsored by Creative Assembly a couple of years back at Rezzed up in Birmingham. So the whole kind of make a game about the 80s was already there when we started thinking about Tango as a game rather than as just a fun thing to do for a day. And so, yeah, it was, I guess in that way, it was a little bit strange, a little bit different. You do hear of quite a few games coming out of jams, but for me, certainly, I've got like a massive list of games I'd love to make. Some like Mike was saying, you've thought of since you were tiny and still want to make, and some of them very, very recent. Some of them I want to make as a designer, and I want to try and explore an idea, a mechanic, something like that. Some of them are, more emotional or story kind of driven, but this came out of a necessity almost. And when we finished the day's work on the jam, it went down really well. It was a competition which we didn't win, but we got a really good response from the audience, and we thought, well, that's a good indicator. And we all decided the four of us decided to work on it sort of in our spare time. So I guess the criteria for judging it and moving forward with it was slightly different than normal.
And so when you guys started the game jam, I guess the theme was provided by the jam, is that correct?
Yeah.
And so you knew the theme, and then I guess the other aspect is art style, gameplay. Which one did you decide on first? I mean, was it just a game jam and everyone just sort of threw whatever they threw in?
So myself and Andrew Roper, the coder, had been working on a shooter before then. So we thought, well, whatever we do, we'll try and make it about shooting, because we've learned some things about that, just as a way to make it easier to make a game in 8 hours. The art style was very much, it was almost there before any of the rest, because we had an artist, and it's like, dude, you just have to draw it in your style because you've got 8 hours. So that's it. You just draw as quickly as you're comfortable drawing. And he's a 2D artist, very talented guy, Ewan Brock, and so that's sort of derived from that directly. And then the music, pretty much again, poor Gavin Harrison, excellent guy, but he had 8 hours to make a half decent tune, and that's pretty tough. But he managed to sneak some steel drums in there, so that was quite nice.
Did he just have those under the desk like you're in the
I don't know how he does it. Like I did, So I guess the art came first. That was the only thing that couldn't budge, I guess, it's quite an interesting thing. A lot of games, that's not the way around that happens, I suppose. And then the mechanic came from choosing the most 80s thing we could think of, which was the scene in Predator where they shoot the jungle a lot. Yeah. And we just thought, well, that sounds simple. We'll have an enemy and some bushes, and you just shoot stuff. And we basically made sort of a single screen Smash TV, I suppose.
Yeah, nice. That makes sense. I guess, Mike, with Volume, you said you always wanted to make a stealth game. So you sort of, I guess, started with genre and, some gameplay attached to it. I guess in the early days, how far did you go figuring out other things like, the theme and the story and that kind of thing?
So I definitely started with genre. I think Volume's kind of unashamedly a very genre game, probably the most genre game I'll ever make. Because it was really interesting doing that, but I'm not sure I'm going to be in a rush to do that again anytime soon. Started with that, and then honestly, like, story just kind of and theme kind of came out of a combination of how do you actually tell a story about stealth? Like, there's sort of either they can be an assassin or they can be a thief. And I didn't want to make a game about an assassin, so it was how do you make a likable thief? And then I heard about Robin Hood. And then for me, it's after those kind of initial things, it's always about what excites me and what I get interested in. Of course. So in that case, it was I was reading about Robin Hood, and I just got really interested in the idea of doing an adaptation, of doing something that was kind of my own and very specific. And then, from that, developed the game. And then, as I was writing it, found myself putting in, things about stuff that was interesting me at the time, in politics or, in conversations or whatever. I quote people, and it's weird because people, play the games I make, and then they, message me going, that was a conversation we had in, Facebook chat, 3 years ago. That's weird. So that's how I just let myself get really excited and enjoy it. I think that's the only way, because I think, if you're forcing it, it's not gonna be good.
Yeah. I mean, something that sort of occurs to me is that in order to evaluate and think about your game idea, you really need to know what you're going for. And I think after Thomas, did you know that, this is going to be a commercial game? It's, it's about selling a game to people as much as, creatively being fulfilling, and where did you sit on that balance, or is it sort of...
No, it was always incredibly selfish. That was always, and I remember doing interviews at the time, saying I'm making the game I want to make, and I'm making an assumption that there will be enough people in the world who share my taste to justify the budget. And that's been proven right so far, which is great. Thank God. I'm very fortunate in that I have an audience and people kind of care about my stuff, which means that I can be incredibly indulgent. And I guess my massively kind of egotistical and self-serving assumption is that the people who like my stuff like me making the games I want to make. So who am I to not make whatever the hell I want? So it is selfish. I think the other thing, though, is as I've grown a team and different people I collaborate with, it's not about me. It's not what I want to make anymore. It's what we want to make together. So, it becomes more about kind of leading in terms of objective, but then having individuals do what they want. But I think we'll probably get to that later in the conversation.
Yeah, definitely. But I also want to talk about, Andrew with Tango. In the game jam, obviously, you're trying to win the game jam is one of the things. But were you guys thinking ahead at all of build something that could be more later, or is it just we've got these 8 hours, we don't really have time to think about anything else?
I always have one eye on the next thing. So I'd be lying if I said I wasn't kind of aware that it could be taken somewhere if it's good enough. But at the time, you just it's heads down, get stuff done. It's kind of, it's funny. It's a super stressful, condensed version of a full game cycle in a way. So we didn't have like the luxury, like Mike was saying, on a bigger project, you do kind of like get buy-in from people, and you kind of smooth the way. In this, it was just like, it wasn't me dictating. It was three people looking at me going, "Tell me what to do." Like,
there's not really time for like an exciting confab, is there?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, how about that bit in Predator? And everyone's like, "Yes, that's awesome. That's signed off. Let's go for it." So, and yeah, most of my time was spent like on a chair going around each bit and sketching bits on paper and just providing what I could support wise. Really, well, after that initial bit, I was basically like, if there's any meltdowns, let me know, but I'm not going to get involved in the code or the art or the audio without someone saying, "Hey, I need you to do this." So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I kind of found interesting, and when I talk to people that don't make games and they want to make a game, or they have a game idea, or actually, I've actually gotten a few emails from random people who just found me on the internet and said, like, "I have this game idea, will you make it with me?"
I need you to invest 2 years of your life and also some money.
But yeah, it's sort of the mistake that I feel is most common is that people think games, like you would pitch a game like you'd pitch a movie, that it's sort of the story is the only thing that matters, and so on and so forth. And I think what's sort of been clear with Volume and Tango is just like in both cases you really need to think about what is this as a whole, like what is the package that I'm delivering and what are the critical pieces of it. It's like, well, this is a stealth game, how do I have a story that matches it, or this is an 80s action game, how does all this mix together. And I think that's sort of it's one of these difficult you don't know to ask yourself the question, and that's obviously why you make the mistake. But it feels like you need to have a certain enough understanding of how games are made in order to even start having a game idea that could be coherent enough to have value. And I think it's one of the reasons like I thought this was a really fun episode, or not fun, but like this would be a really interesting episode to do.
This isn't fun.
This is not fun.
Right this
would be a very serious.
This is very important. You're pitching an experience, right? Like that's how I always think of it. I remember I got getting a lot of like CVs from designers like 2 jobs ago, and one of the running jokes was you would have like someone would send in their design for a boss fight, and you would have 5 pages explaining like the castle and why the castle's where it is and the political situation that led to that castle being on the top of that particular mountain. And then the character, and then and the player enters the castle and there is a fight, and you're like, no, that's the game design bit, that like half a sentence. And I think it's the experience. It's how does the player feel like, and I'm very much the kind of designer who just wants to make like a fun, rewarding kind of core gameplay loop. Other designers like actively are not interested in that aspect and want to create experiential stuff or more of the art end of things, which is absolutely cool. But regardless, it's never I'm making a film. It's always what's the experience that I'm going to create and how am I going to use all of the powers of the media, which do include script and mise-en-scène and all this stuff, but there's a lot more to that as well. So how do you combine all those things, that all the colors in the palette?
Yeah, because I think the last time I had to actually, process a game idea was when I made Ring Fling, and it was like, that was a game I made in 10 days total. But the whole point for me, it actually wasn't, how do I, achieve this creative masterpiece or anything like that. It was that I hadn't made mobile games before, and before I invested in something big, I wanted to sort of test it out. And the thing that's really important to me in games nowadays is games that you can play with people in real life, because I sort of feel like I'm constantly making that decision of, do I want to, play the single player game, or do I want to spend time with, certain people in my life? And so, I thought I'll make, it was a very purposeful thing of like, I'll make a local multiplayer game, release it on iOS, see how much money it makes compared to how much time I put into it, see if this is a viable place for me to sort of make something like this. And I actually came to the conclusion it wasn't. But I think it was one of these things of, I definitely started with, here's a purpose, and then what is the gameplay that sort of serves that purpose, and then, what else can come with it. And I think that game was bare bones enough that there wasn't anything else with it, there wasn't a story or anything like that. So I think, it's not like you always need, oh, well, here's the, the artistic vision, or here's the whatever, but it's like, you do need to know why you're making this game. As you said, if you're making like something that's artistically creative, you need to think about what are all the things that need to hold together for me to deliver that experience or that vision and that kind of stuff. So,
or you need to it's either you have to sit down and plan, or there are plenty of games that have come out of kind of playing and making stuff, and when you happen upon that fun experience, having the wherewithal to like spot, oh, that's good. That's the fun bit.
Yeah.
And we certainly had loads of moments. Well, I mean, a lot of volume is like us trying to make something else and then like getting halfway through and going, no, we're going in the wrong direction. So being able to catch those, and game jams are an excellent example of that, where you have people like start making one thing and then just really get hooked on the other thing. So I don't necessarily think like an idea has to start in your head and then be transposed onto the computer. I think sometimes like you just start throwing stuff and something appears, and if you can identify that, that's an absolutely valid way of creating ideas, and often more exciting than just kind of sitting hoping something will come to you.
Yeah, one random thing I did want to sort of put together is each phase I'll hopefully remember to ask you guys, I guess, how long were you thinking about volume, before you started actually, I guess, working on it properly?
Oh, like in an undirected way, years, but in like a directed, like, here's a thing I really should like consider, like a couple of months maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. And obviously Tango, something less than 8 hours.
Well, yes, but then I suppose like more truthfully, the game that it's turned into, we probably spent like on and off a month and a half, maybe thinking about it, building it up, and wrapping it up into what we pitched and signed. So
yeah, cool. And I guess so the next phase in a lot of games productions, and I guess it kind of blends a bit with the idea phase, is sort of the pre-production phase. I guess, how do you guys define pre-production for your projects?
For me, it's like it's prototyping. It's early story stuff, although I wouldn't write the entire script in pre-production, but like definitely working out what the setting is, and then as a result of that, like the conceptual art kind of stages. So for example, with pre-production for Volume was me making a kind of a version of a game where you could run around, hide behind walls. There was an editor that you could place those walls, and I think I had an enemy patrolling back and forth. And that was enough to convince me, like, okay, I can make a stealth game, and this is the kind of stealth game we're going to make. And then, simultaneously, Daz doing like all the concept art and kind of playing with ideas. That would be kind of where I draw the line. I think the other aspect of that is that, often that's done before you have kind of buy-in from whoever's paying for it, which is often the fact to like, Volume was entirely self-funded, but, that doesn't mean I've not been in that process before where you kind of got to produce, pitch materials, basically. So you have to kind of make great concept art, write up kind of what the design is, do very high-level design documentation, just saying this could be really cool and you should give us lots of money, and then like prototypes that kind of prove that core idea. So it's weird because it's a part of production that often is like the freest, because you haven't, if you're not someone who's able to self-fund, you're not indebted to anyone yet. You're not like working with external people, so you can really do whatever you want. So it's exciting on that level, definitely.
Yeah, what was the pre-production cycle like for Tango? I guess the pre-production cycle for, after the game jam, like when you guys were like, we're going to make this into, a proper, downloadable product game.
Yeah, so we were lucky that we had a little fun little thing to run around with, and like Mike was saying, we spent quite a lot of time just sort of going, what would be cool to add next? That was probably about a month of it. Month and a half maybe, and then when we started to see the results of that and think, actually, like people are still liking it and liking it more, we'd take it around to get played at places like Loading Bar and things. So we thought, right, that was the moment at which I was like, rather than thinking maybe this could be something, I was like, right, let's try and make this something. So I talked to the guys, and we agreed we'd try and sort of pitch it around. So up until the point where we signed, we developed, I guess we developed like a mock-up screenshot with sort of final art, because it was all very much still rushed jam stuff. So almost like a target render, really, with HUD elements and some of the key gameplay being shown. So things like having 4 characters, each of them in the middle of doing something different, down to the fact that it's an action two-stick shooter, but there's reloading. So one of the characters was reloading, one of the characters was throwing a grenade, things like that. Scale of environment, all that kind of thing, really, where the camera was, that sort of thing. And then alongside that, I prepared, I guess, like a 3 or 4 page, very short, like, again, as Mike was saying, a very short sort of concept document. Key features, how they'd impact the game, the broad structure, the estimated sort of hours of content, I suppose. Publishers are always interested, the value of it, how much we would want to make it and how long we would take. And because one of the main elements was multiplayer, we'd sort of like sat down and went, look, this is quite serious. Online multiplayer is an absolute nightmare. Do we think this is a multiplayer game? And if we think that, do we think we'd be doing it a disservice not having online, bearing in mind it will be shipping on PC? And we sort of thought, in fact, yeah, we would. So we pitched it with online. So we got feedback saying, we need proof of this. And it's like, of course you do.
Yep.
So Roper, the hero that he is, basically knuckled down and just it was something that we essentially tore out and threw away, but it proved that we had online multiplayer. It proved that we could do it, and that obviously with more time we would do a better job. It was quite simple, but yeah, so eventually we had a playable prototype, or maybe like 2 or 3 almost, that were kind of separate, that all said, here's fun shooting, we did that in 8 hours. Here's online multiplayer, it kind of works. And then another one, I think, was here's just like some randomness stuck together, because the procedural generation was the third bit. So it's been a while since I pitched that. It's been 2 years. It's been a while since before then that I last pitched a game, but I've successfully pitched games with less. In terms of working product, but
I feel like it used to be that, like, I remember pitching. I won't say what but for like a major IP, I managed to successfully pitch with, as part of a bigger company. Like, it took us, I think, a day, and like 2 people, we produced like a 6-page document and got like multi-million dollars. I don't feel that's how it is anymore. That's it was a golden time where that was actually possible, and we're not there now. But and I think because honestly, prototypes are much easier to make now than they used to be, right? Yeah. Like, so I think publishers are kind of within their rights to expect that work.
Yeah, like we were saying last week, if you've got a job application and it doesn't have something playable, you kind of think, why not? What's going on? So it's same with publishers.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Andrew, that you sort of very quickly identified, here's the 3 things that we intended to prove. It's just like, we were going to prove the online and this and this. And it's like, I think there's a lot of people that sort of, and it's probably a fine way to progress sometimes, but I do feel it's really convenient when here's exactly what we're trying to prove. And you also know, like, well, we haven't proven these things. Like, is it time to rethink things or reevaluate it? Or, is there a different game we can make? Oh, 2 of these pieces work. What does that game look like? Or what does it look like? What could we add as a new third piece, and so on and so forth. But yeah, I think you're right. In my notes for the show, I did separate pre-production and prototype, but I can't think of the last time that those were separate in my life. I think back in the days at Insomniac, it was like, well, there's engine programmers and they're working on a thing, and then while they're doing it, a bunch of people are making paper documents and concept art and things that don't require you to get in there. But yeah, nowadays, any time that you have an idea, it's easy enough to build some semblance of that to get an idea of if it's actually a good idea or not.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it's to do with team size as well. I know, Mike, you had more people at its height on volume than we did with Tango. But certainly in terms of the concept art for us, our concept artist was our asset artist, was our animator. That was it. Yeah. So there was a much less of an overhead or I guess a requirement for us to produce reams of stuff. We didn't have to have a Bible because that was in his head, and like that was a real strong part of it. Actually, it's obvious when you say it, but it means small teams, you're flexible, but that's like you're nimble. That's one of the reasons. It's because you don't have to spend so much time communicating.
Which is where it falls down, and where things get trickier. It's certainly one of the areas that we had the most challenges. Like, I think we did all right, but like it's certainly something that we had to think about much more than like say Thomas Was Alone, where it was literally me and David and Danny for an afternoon. Like that was it. Like it was basically like that was incredibly straightforward because it was all down to two people, and we just had to, as long as me and David had a chat every couple of weeks, we were fine. Whereas with Volume, at the peaks we had like 10 people working simultaneously, and that's a lot of stuff, and it exponentially creates communication work because the more people you have, everyone has to talk to everyone, or use materials and documentation and all this stuff, and it piles up. But I think you can solve some of that in pre-production. Like I think pre-production is great for defining the vision, and I hate that because it's a really pretentious phrase. But at the same time, like everyone knowing what it is that you're trying to achieve at the end point, it means that people can kind of go off in their own direction. Like with Volume, we said, Volume is a game where we want the player to feel clever and cool. And if a decision that we were making didn't like serve one of those outcomes, then we all knew that's not the way to go. And likewise, like if someone wanted to bring an idea in, and people often did, and a lot of those ideas went in, it wasn't just like me creating, leading the team. It was everyone having ideas. Then they had to justify it by those two measures. Like if that's okay, does this help this? So I think that's what pre-production's amazing for as well, because everyone's got that room to actually kind of come up with that stuff. You're not in a rush. You're not in that kind of immediate terror of like we have to get this thing working.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one question I sort of have about like pre-production is, I guess there's a lot of projects where you don't know exactly what you're trying to prove, and I feel like it's a viable way to move forward, but it's just you have to acknowledge that you're incurring this risk. Mm-hmm. And I think with the same is like, I've been on projects where they say, with our prototype, we're going to prove these things, and then you don't because, whether it's like, oh, we have a holiday release and so on and so forth. And I think it doesn't always end in disaster, but you always have to be aware that like you're just bringing a little bit more risk with you. One question I had is, how much, I guess, of all the work you did in pre-production, how much did you end up throwing away?
Almost all of it. Like, I think, like, prototypes you don't carry over. That's not true. There's actually a lot of prototype code in Volume. I said it, and I was like, this is the clever, true answer, but then I realised, actually, no, like, there's lots of mess. You shouldn't, though. Like, it should be, because you have to be free to kind of throw stuff out, so you have to be able to delete stuff, because if you're in the mindset where it's like, everything we do in pre-production must be useful, then you're not going to experiment, you're not going to try new things, you're not going to take risks, because it's like you're in that immediate like this all has to be worthwhile. There's the idea of wasting money. Like work out what your budget is for pre-production and then spend all of that because you're not going to save yourself any hassle by not exploring a cool character idea or a cool mechanic. But everyone's fallible. I mean, things do go wrong in development, and there's lots of ways that can happen, and I don't think any pre-production can completely protect you against that.
Yeah.
That's sort of like the next question is just like how once you've left pre-production, you still don't 100% know what your game is, but it feels like you have a pretty good idea, and you have enough confidence that the rest is out there, and you have to move on to sort of the next phases to do the really heavy work to find out if that thing you sort of got some indication is out there, if you can actually find it or not. I guess before we move on to the next part, I guess for each of you, for your pre-production phase, how long was it? How many people did you have on it?
Go, Smithy.
Yeah, I guess it was all four of us. So that's design, art, music, and audio and code. And I think we probably count the 3 months till pitch as the prototyping. Yep. Again, we were quite lucky in that sense. It was very much on and off. It ramped up the closer it got to like actually pitching and securing the deal. And then I think, if I'm honest, maybe like the first month was prototyping. It wasn't like a conscious thing at the time, which maybe it should have been. But we had a really aggressive schedule to get out on early access and to a show to EGX, I think it was, within like a month or two, and yeah, some of that haunted us,
Yeah.
even right up to like now. But yeah, I think maybe like out of was it like basically a 2 year project? I suppose like 3 months or four,
Yep.
something like that.
In my case, I mean, it depends where the cutoff. I mean, because I didn't have the pitch necessarily. Like the only person I was pitching to was myself, so kind of there was definitely a bleed.
the mirror.
Yeah,
Was that
yeah.
an awkward meeting? Yeah.
Mike, do we think Mike's clever? Yeah, we do actually. Yeah, let's go with it. No, so there's more of a blur than I guess there was for you, Smithy. But like, yeah, I mean, in the actual like proper pre-production, it was me prototyping, coding it, and then and playing with the story stuff, and then Daz, who's my long-term concept art partner. Who draws the pretty pictures? So he was kind of developing that stuff. And I guess for me, I would end I think I would say it was us, and I would say that probably that phase lasted about 2 months before we got serious, and then we had to go right. Let's hire an artist to make the character mesh. Let's do this. Let's do that. Like that was the point where the team started to grow.
Yep. Speaking of which, I mean that's what production looks like, right?
Correct.
I guess at the peak of production, how big were each of your teams? Four, always four for Andrew.
Well, yeah, no, but then actually, I would say 6.
I helped for 2 days or 3
He
days.
helped for 2 days, and I think that was at the same time that we had another guy, or round about the same time. Basically, code was, and I mean, pretty much always is on a project this size, is like the big lump. So there are a couple of like real thorny bits that or times when Roper was just getting like there's just so much, and it's like either for morale or just because there is just literally something that we're hitting our heads against and can't fix, and we just got a couple of people in. I would say maybe 6 at peak.
Yeah, I think in terms of like concurrent, we were probably, I think on our worst days we were maybe 8 to 10 people.
Okay.
But like I think the credits list on Volume is like in the 30s.
Okay, yeah.
Just because with Volume, because I think the big differentiator between Volume and Tango Fiesta was that we had 3D art, so that necessitated a bunch of different people. Like a lot, 3D art like requires a lot of specialization, a lot of specialists, which means a lot of individuals, not all working full time. That was the thing. Was so while Smithy like had a concept artist who then became like the asset artist and presumably was like pretty close to full time on the project, right? Yeah. Like what I had was a concept artist who phased off and became less busy, and then I had a 3D artist and they became less busy, and then rigging, and then animation, and then more animation because we decided to have cutscenes. So it's like, okay, that's something we need. So it's significantly more people. But then the workload per person is lower. But I would still say, like in terms of like, well, in the industry we call them man hours, right? Like that's a term that might not make sense to the audience. Basically, you measure how long a job's going to take in man hours, and that's number of people times the time they're working. I'm realizing that man hours probably sounds bad.
It's not
like,
great.
Should it be like? But that's the thing. Like I've had this conversation because it bothers me. Like person hours, people hours. It's weird, isn't it? It all sounds very odd. Anyway,
I always get criticized by my other half by referring to people as human hours.
Human hours.
But because it makes it seem like I'm not one of them.
Yeah. It sounds either it sounds aloof or massively self-deprecating, right? Like you're either above or below them. Anyway, whatever we call them, like that measurement of time, like I would say that Volume definitely probably had more time spent on it just because of the number of people, but it's not proportional. It's not like 30 people is like 7.5 times as much work as 4 people.
Of course, yeah. And I guess when you guys entered production, did you guys do the thing where you have a document that has like, this is every level we're going to need, this is every asset, and obviously it's wrong and it needs to be added to later, but did you guys sit down and do all that kind of stuff, or do something more organic?
I'm going to let Smithy answer this. I want to see how honest Smithy's going to be with his answer.
No, it was super organic. So at the start of this project, I was very much of the opinion that as a designer who had written countless design documents that had never been read, that I would never write another one. And I didn't, but by the end of it, I was like, oh, but there are all these other documents that are actually quite useful. What we did, part of that is because I was stubborn, part of that was because early access meant that we kind of had a different approach to development than maybe we would if we were just doing one lump of game. You know, we had to kind of plan it in interesting chunks to play rather than necessarily what made sense from a purely development point of view. So we decided that I think we launched on early access with 2 worlds of content. So that's 2 kind of environment sets, enemy sets, etc. We planned all of that. And then bashed out assets for those, and then we used that as kind of like a template. It's like, right, so there are about, I don't know what it was, 15 kind of categories of tile, of which 12 are just like background things and whatever, and we would make sure that we kind of kept that consistent. But it was pretty freeform, especially as the further into the game we get with the 5 worlds, we actually hadn't decided on maybe what the last 2 were definitely going to be. So they're all themed around movies for the audience. So yeah, we decided on I think it was Ghostbusters and RoboCop were in contention with things like Die Hard and Mad Max. So there's a character in it who hasn't got a world, and he was gonna, but he kind of got shoved out of the way. I can't remember why, to be honest. But yeah, it was pretty organic, although maybe it only feels that way because it was lots of little bits of structure, and each one was almost like almost, but crucially not quite, a full dev cycle on a chunk of content. We ended up still having quite a lot of sort of stuff that wasn't quite finished at the end.
So it kind of felt like you guys had a template, and you were like, well, we're going to do this many templates, but there's lots and lots of details that we still need to figure out.
Exactly, yeah.
Ready for your lie, Mike?
My lie? No, well, we split ours. I mean, we split ours more by job, because Volume's much more modular, like than most games, because it's all built around this level editor. So it was much easier to go, these are our 20 objects, these are our 9 gadgets, these are our 3 characters, these are our 6, and whatever, and itemize that out, and then just kind of work out the workflow for each of those. That a character obviously required an artist to model it, a person to rig it, an animator to make any bespoke animation, me to implement it. But a chair, I just need it modelled. Obviously you have the concept art phase before that, which is what Daz is rolling on throughout production. For the first half of production, he's just literally drawing every prop in the game out so that we can model them consistently. But yeah, we did it by object, and that were object, and then cross that across to kind of what job, who was going to be working on it, or which profession was going to be working on it, because we obviously had multiple kind of people doing the same job. We were very good at we were very good. We were poaching people, basically. At a moment where, if we knew a mate who was a 3D artist who was free for a weekend, we'd just get them to do some stuff for it, and we had lots of people like that we tended to grab people at moments where they weren't busy, basically. Or if a company was closing down, we'd grab those people that could do some stuff for us, and that meant that some people kind of who lost their job got to kind of have a buffer where they were working for us while they looked for the next one, and there was stuff like that. And I'd like to present that as completely an altruistic act, but also there's obviously a very very logical reason to do that. These are good people. So it was that was how we did it, and it meant lots of fluctuation in team size, and we had to keep it simple because no one reads the documents. You can write beautiful game design documents about how bloody clever you are, but no one ever reads them. So it really just does become around just talking, just I through Volume, I was probably on Skype 3 or 4 hours a day to various people.
Yeah. With Tango, I was just going to say, the documentation that we did write was basically around tools. So from a point of view, we've got an AI tool with all the behaviors that we could possibly want, and tried to make them modular and combine in interesting ways. Ditto with weapons, and so that was probably, we won't reference stuff, I suppose, but not really a design doc with a story or anything.
Can I just jump in? Sorry, Cynical Monkey is talking about FTE, full-time equivalent, which is pretty good, but that's not what we mean. So I want to explain what man hours mean, in terms of budgeting. You're literally working out it will take someone X number of hours to do this thing. It's not about the individual doing the job. Obviously, if you're working on, you're working full time or whatever, that's a separate thing. Man hours is a measurement of the time it will take to make something, which is independent of how many people you have. So if you have 10 man hours worth of artwork, you can hire 5 people and get them to do 2 hours, or you can hire 1 person and get them to do 10, and it's the same thing. So it's a different measurement, but we need a better one. We really do, because obviously man hours is horrifically dated now. But yeah, it's a slightly different measurement, and honestly, it's one that you don't really need to worry about unless you're budgeting full projects, basically.
I mean, I think the key to it is that it's an abstraction that this is an amount of work, rather than like this is what a team is, or this is a number of people or whatever. Yeah,
it's a way of getting around the fact that, like, you might, if you're a studio with multiple games being made, you might not be able to have Susan, who's really good at special effects work, graphic effects, particle effects, whatever. Like, you might not be able to have her on a game full time. So you work out, okay, we can have her half the time, which is how many man hours, and it's how you apportion scheduling. But yeah, it's boring, isn't it? I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I wanted to touch upon is that when I was in my AAA days, I felt like at least the purpose of production was always to sort of, you did these prototypes, you knew what the core of your game was, and production was just like, we'll try as many variations as we can, and any of those that end up being fun, let's pile them in together. And I think that was sort of, you need to prove your core in pre-prod, but then in production, it's all about variety, and the more variety we have, the longer experience we can justify, and so on and so forth. So is that roughly how you guys see it as well?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It's variety, and for me it's like density of overlap is the thing that I always worry about a lot. Like, does this mechanic interact with another mechanic in an interesting way? Because I think it's very easy to design mechanics in isolation where you're like, this is a really cool door and this is a really cool gun, and then all you can do is you can have a door, then a gun, then a door, then a gun. Whereas if you can work out a way that shooting that door does something different, or some kind of interaction between those things. So that's always the thing for me, especially in indie dev, because you don't have unlimited resources. I mean, you never have unlimited resources, but you certainly have more limited resources, which means that, like, you have to squeeze as much gameplay out of anything as you can. So for us, that was always the thing, was, does this mechanic work with 3 other mechanics? Can we come up with like 5 interesting levels where we can use this? Because if it's just you press a button and a cool thing happens, then that's not going to get you very far, and you're going to spend a lot of time making that cool thing and then not being able to reuse anywhere, because you'll end up with a mechanic that just feels repetitive. Yeah. I mean, I think it's kind of interesting. Like, I think there's some AAA games that I've played where just like you play the first level and then you play for like 7 hours and it's literally the same thing over and over. Mm-hmm. And I feel like those are sort of games that I feel failed in production. And I've kind of seen it before of each little. I guess, Andrew, you guys did the templates, like, oh, we'll do this template, and we'll do this template. And I think that's actually kind of common, in that you say, well, we're going to try this new thing. And then, but I always felt like in AAA, because the deadlines are so tight, when this thing doesn't work out the way you wanted, it's like, well, let's fall back. And when you don't have enough time on production to, prove out these new ideas or these explorations, or you end up with an idea that, or a concept or a mechanic that just isn't actually that deep, you kind of end up with this thing that feels very monotonous, and it's kind of bad. And I think it's great nowadays because if you get to that point, you might be able to say, well, let's make a short 2 or 3 hour game out of it, like something like that. But I feel like back then it wasn't an option, right? It's like, or just make it really, really pretty. That's
exactly. Make them enjoy the environment. Yeah. Cool. So I guess how much time did each of you spend in sort of what you call production? And I guess the next phase I have is alpha. So production up to alpha, let's say.
Okay, well, go on, Mike. Because
it depends how you define alpha. Like, that's the key one, because alpha to me is a milestone rather than like a phase.
Got it. I guess sort of the way I define alpha is actually pretty strange, and it's definitely not the industry standard. It's sort of when you have all the pieces of the game you originally thought you were going to make.
Oh wow. Okay. Well, by that definition, about 2.5 years. No, like that. Yeah, I think we produce volume. We didn't have. like for me, the alpha was kind of a few mechanics that felt good, a few gadgets, a couple of enemy types. Like, it certainly wasn't content complete. But then we're now with Coda, we're much more sticking to very stringent, like, alpha is content complete. With volume, because we weren't really working with anyone, we could take a slightly more kind of loose, should we say, that's a polite word, approach to how things were delivered. Coda, which is, for people who don't know, is the DLC we're doing. I'm not plugging it. I'm just using a sample because this is what we're working on right now. I am also plugging it. Like, that's very much like going to hit a content complete alpha at some point. On volume, that like a content complete alpha was a good 2 years. Yeah.
I think, probably a more standard definition for alpha is sort of when you can play from beginning to end of the game, right? And you sort of have, like, all your menus and all these, it's sort of, it kind of is content complete, but I generally don't think it
the framework of the content. Like, I know what you mean. Like, there's still definitely lots of polish to do after alpha, because otherwise you'd have finished the game. But I know what you mean. We did with volume, like, that was one of the biggest kind of mistakes, I guess, in production, was that we really didn't hold ourselves to that early on. How about you, Smithy?
It's a tough one. So we had the framework, and we had people playing it and buying it really early because it was on early access. And that's, I guess, when it was sort of alpha.
Yeah,
but
I think it
at the
does
same
feel
time,
like that.
Yeah, we still had to iterate on that and, like, expand the game, but it had all the core bits in it. And yeah, so I mean, I guess, like, it's somewhere between like 3 months and I guess like a year and a half.
Yeah.
It's interesting how early access does kind of force you to get to alpha much quicker, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a whole other podcast, I think. But to summarize my feelings on it, I would say, it was weird. It was weird.
Yeah, I guess, like that weird definition I gave first is always, it's sort of based on my experiences when I was in AAA of, it was because you had such a big team, at the beginning of production, you did make, here's the list of all the things we're making, and then you would make all those things, and then you would focus test it, and you would sort of realize, wow, like, this is not the game, like, this isn't great, it kind of holds together. And I think there was always this really, really interesting moment. Like, I always loved this part of the project, but also dreaded it, where you sort of say, here's all the things we made. What is the best way to present 80% of this to look, as good as possible? Because it's like, you don't have time to remake everything, but you have enough time that you can sort of rearrange things and, really find the things that are the strongest and emphasize those and de-emphasize the weaker things or cut a few things here or there. And I think
that's why video game stories always suck.
Yeah,
you've worked out, like, your brilliant story arc across 10 exciting, beautiful levels, and then you have to cut 2 of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you have to the 4th one is now the last one, and the 6th one is now the first level, and so I think that's sort of what I always thought about alpha, and I always thought it was an interesting thing in that I like the pressure of AAA deadlines in that space, and that you knew, okay, we have 3 months, or let's say 2 months between alpha and beta. It's just, how do we cobble the things we already have together into something else? Where I feel like a lot of the times, if you have an infinite amount of time, and I've seen this on, some projects recently, is just like, if you have no pressures on you, you go to alpha and you're like, that's not really what we wanted, and you kind of remake the whole thing. And I feel like once you get in that cycle, you're kind of destined to do that every time you get to that point.
Yep.
I think Smithy's smiling at the same chat comment as I am.
Head up on my screens.
Well, I think that's an interesting point. The whole, like, understanding that games development isn't about having a game planned and then making it, right? And especially when someone else's money is involved, the publisher, say, it's usually who it is. The main difference between, like, a good relationship and a bad relationship with a publisher is a publisher that understands that or not. It's the same thing that I think informs a lot of the sort of real sort of aggressively negative stuff about, like, buggy games that are released and things like that. It's just kind of like that basic misunderstanding about what it is that making a game is. And I get a bit more specifically what a designer is supposed to do. Like, we don't have all the answers. If we had all the answers, we'd just hire someone in India to do it. Do you know what I mean? because
I'm
it'd be
going
a
to
lot.
go and get my Vita and just be sat here playing Volume on it while we talk. That's the only way to solve the chat situation right now. Bloody great.
Yeah, so it's like, yeah, like all we do is ask the right questions and hope that we can come up with the answers and prove that we're proving the working a lot.
Yeah.
You know, and hopefully, you know, you get to the end and it's a fun game and it's a miracle that any ever is. You know, well, it's not, but yeah, it's like the chances are it won't be fun by the time that you've had like all of this stuff happen to the process. So.
It sucks, doesn't it? That's something I'd love to work out the solution to, is that stress, like the fact that you fall out of love with your game, like towards the end. No, that's not true. You don't fall out of love with it, but it certainly becomes trickier as it goes on.
Yeah, definitely.
And it shouldn't be. But then I guess, to be honest, like if I'm ever sat making a game and I'm not stressed, then I'm probably not working hard enough, and I've just become an arrogant prick. There you go. There's a big before you move. Is prick a swear word?
I wouldn't believe it.
You wouldn't believe
Pee-pee.
prick.
Because I'm lazy.
Arrogant people.
So I can say prick as many times as I want. You won't believe
Yeah,
it.
as many times as you want.
I'm excited.
It's not like the PG rating where I like count the number of them and I'm like, that's one too many, or
I'm fighting the urge to just start swearing like intermittently, not sequentially, but just like once every sentence, just
bits and pieces. Yeah.
just to make your life harder.
Swear in the chat. It's safer.
Chat can be sworn in, yeah.
So
Okay.
yeah. Well, I was going to say like beta, right?
Yep.
To me, it's almost the bit, and I don't know. I want to see your reactions to this statement. To me, beta is the bit where the publisher wants to ship the game and the developer doesn't.
Yeah, like that's it. Or increasingly, that's what I don't like about beta as a word is that there's now, thanks to like the marketing machine, like there is a player perception of what beta is, which is not, which is horrible. Like the expectation of beta is that basically it's a demo of your video game, and that's very much not what beta actually means on a game dev level, and that makes it frustrating when you're doing an interview with the press, or if you do something publicly and then you see comments, or sometimes actually the journalists make the assumption that like a beta means like the Battlefront beta, and it's like no.
That game is almost done.
That game is done. Like that's a demo. It's a vertical slice, but it's like better than a vertical slice. Like it's the game. They just finished 2 levels early. That's what that is. So obviously I'm sure they'll take data and blah blah blah. But yeah, so it's I think Smithy's right. It's that point where it's good enough. Yeah. But like no developer ever wants to ship a game that's good enough.
Yeah, I think the way I sort of think about beta is sort of, you have the game you're going to ship. It's just really rough. It's really buggy. There's a lot of polish that needs to happen, but it's sort of, it's sort of, I guess, before the sanding stage. It's that kind of thing for me of like, you're not dramatically going to be able to change the shape of the thing after beta. I mean, obviously someone's going to ninja in 1 or 2 dramatic changes, but for the most part, it's sort of this is the shape of the thing, and it's your job to sort of just polish it up and make it feel like it's a proper commercially released product.
You should be, after beta, you should be basically bug fixing and secretly adding stuff when your boss is looking. The best story I have about beta is when we were doing a Wii this many years ago, doing a Wii game, original Wii, vintage. And there was a junior designer who will remain nameless, who's now like quite senior on the AAA franchise, so hopefully he won't do this again. But he decided that there should be a really awesome rain effect in one of the levels, and he added it without telling anyone. And it dropped the frame rate down to about like 10 frames a second in one level that was quite late in the game, so the producers and stuff didn't notice for a little while. That was fun. The day they realized was very interesting.
Yeah, I mean the thing that I found most interesting, so I learned it on my first game, but I've sort of experienced this on every game I've worked on, that there's I guess having played so many games in my life, I think subconsciously there's sort of like things that you expect and things you don't expect. And I think there's a moment in post beta where it's just like you start debugging something and your brain doesn't sort of drag on these things that are like, oh, this isn't a game like, and it starts to feel like a real game. Yeah. And you just end up playing for 2 or 3 hours of your own game. You're like, whoa, what's happening? And I think that's sort of, I think that's
a really
always
good sign when that happens.
yeah, that's sort of like the moment that you feel like I could ship this and it would be, accepted as like this is a par standard, but I have another 3 weeks, so I'm going to stay up every day those 3 weeks and see how far I can push beyond it.
Yeah.
But I think I've definitely had that experience on every project, even the projects that were like there's definitely projects where there were some levels where you kind of got that, but there are definitely other parts where you're like, we're going to ship this, and this is a bit, it's very clear that it's not right.
Yeah. I mean, look at the big boys, by which I mean Valve, Blizzard, Nintendo, and surely countless others. They're the ones that sort of talk publicly about it. They just, they get a game to what I always assume is probably beta, and then go, nope. And then they make it all again, and they cut all the shit, and then they make a good game that's half the size out of all the good bits, and then fill up the rest with the good bits. It's like, I would make great games if everything I made was a sequel, I swear. But
you also need like infinite money in order to make that happen, which is
exactly.
it's a challenge. It's a challenge.
Cool. I guess we're running a little bit long. I did want to ask you guys if you had the same experience that I had, and this is sort of, the moment between your game being accepted and your game releasing being the strangest emotional period of a game. Like I always felt like, you're crunching, you submit it, it's accepted, you kind of celebrate, but you don't have enough energy left to celebrate, and then there's this weird period of, oh, well, I don't have anything to do. I mean, I've actually heard people refer to it as like post-production depression, of just like, you've got all this adrenaline going through you, and suddenly you have nowhere to put it for like 2 or 3 weeks, and then it's out, and then you're trying to recover all your momentum and energy and so on and so forth. Is that the same experience that you guys have basically had, or? Pretty
much. I mean, I long to be back in a world where you finish a game, submit it, and then 3 weeks pass before it comes out. Those were the days, man. Yeah. Now it's like you're doing your final upload to Steam like midnight the day it comes out. It's weird. It's a weird one for me. Like I had this with Volume, especially. Like Thomas Was Alone was cool because I released it and no one cared. So it was like, it wasn't a big event. It was like Thomas was very much like a creep. After like 1 or 2 months, like it got very big very fast. But that launch was nice because it kind of didn't happen. There wasn't like a big palaver. Whereas what was weird with Volume was I had exactly the feelings you're talking about. That emptiness of finishing it, and like, what do I do now? I wouldn't go as far as to call it depression, I think, but yeah, like that kind of that feeling. But then immediately that's replaced with the, oh god, it doesn't work on Xbox One controllers.
Yeah.
And if you hold your computer monitor facing east, then the game crashes, and you're fixing all those those launch day bugs. But I've not really come up for air. That's the thing. I'm really in need of a holiday, and that's definitely part of the plan for the next few months is to find some time, because like now it's just you launch a game, you have all this stress like built up, and then you have to do the updates, and you have to do the new content, and you announce the DLC too quickly, and like you have all this stuff that you're doing and getting on with, and it kind of bleeds too much into the next one. I think what was nice about the old way of doing it was that we got those weeks where there's nothing going on now. And it was just a nice coming thing. And the other thing, of course, was because there was no patches or updates back then in the good old days when games shipped massively buggy. You'd finish, you'd read the reviews that weekend. Not on your phone. I did playing on my smartphone. This was back in the day. You'd be on your computer, but you'd read the reviews, and then you'd be back in the office the next Monday, and right, let's start the next thing, and it'll be an exciting new experience. And now it kind of seems to blur. Like I don't know where you're at, Smithy, but I assume you're still working on Tango Fiesta and still doing stuff and finding problems and.
Yeah, actively. It's weird. Back in the day when I was working at other companies and stuff, absolutely that was the way it was. Like, you do get that sort of weird feeling of sort of, the best. It must just be adrenaline, and then a lack of things to use the adrenaline on. But this time the end kind of came 3 times, and we'd already done the launch because early access. And then, so that it wasn't like the first time people were going to have to play it or anything. So that wasn't nerve-wracking or anything like that. And then like the way that the project sort of almost like, so the team sort of ramped down a little bit, and basically, as it always is, it's basically design or production and code at the end, and the art and audio are done. And because we're all basically freelancers, they were literally done. They weren't there's no office for them to be in. It was like, it was weirdly, it's not like, oh, poor us, you know, it wasn't lonely, but it was less sort of buzzy than it was before. And then as a designer, it got to the point where it's just bug fixing, and we were like, right, so I'm probably just going to make things worse if I actively work on this. So I had to find something to do, and I ended up making that little RPG Maker game about the sort of jam. And I was just like, I want to learn a tool, you know, expend some of this energy, feel like I'm doing something useful, and hopefully help, you know, use it to help Tango in some way. And then the launch came, and we were able to kind of make a thing of it, because we got to go back to the show where it was born and all that kind of stuff. So that's the first time that we've ever had it sort of wrapped up so neatly, and I think that really helped sort of negate any of that potential.
You got to launch it live.
yeah, exactly, right. And so all of the potential sort of bumps, I suppose, like the cliffs that you could fall off and just find yourself going, oh, what do I do? Weren't really there. They were sort of like smoothed out for us quite a lot. I do not expect that to be the case ever again. A one-off thing, really. But we're still actively working on it, and that's the thing with just like, you know, we did early access, regular updates. It's hard not to just carry on doing that. We did sit down and go, right, what are we actually going to do, like, sensibly? Can't do it forever. It's been strange.
Yep.
I still haven't had a haircut. My hair's getting, I'm just looking at it now, and it's like, I spent a day like in a recording studio with loads of really, really like clean cut, well presented actors. It's just making me feel massively look at that, that's awful. Sorry, carry on.
Cool. No, I think that's basically, I don't know if I presume it's run a bit long. I'll definitely scan the entire chat for questions and write them down, and we'll follow up maybe next time.
You don't want to do questions?
Did you see any that I have?
There was one, why does Mike have a polystyrene head?
That's a fair question. I'm just going to do this.
I think, because we, like, in the notes, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but we were going to maybe cover, like, post-launch and all of the interest there as well. So maybe we do the next episode on that and associated things, because we've all experienced that from various points of view, you know, updates, ports, you know, we always say launching a game is like the beginning, actually, these days. So it's probably a whole hour at least, I would say.
I think so.
We can definitely, that's definitely something we can come back to, because
Mike
really comfortable
I didn't want to run this forever. All right. Thanks everyone who joined us for this. Sorry we didn't get to your questions. I literally do read through the whole thing and write down all the questions. And I guess we'll be seeing you same time next week.
Yes,
that's the plan.
And I guess, where can they find you on the internet?
Smithy?
So I'm at Spilt Milk Studio on Twitter, and give us more importantly, give us a follow on the old Twitch channel here as well, and then come and say hi on Twitter as well. That'd be cool.
I would echo Smithy's suggestion that you favorite. What do people do on Twitch? They follow, right? Do they follow? Do they subscribe?
Yeah, it's follow. Yeah,
subscribe.
Right? It's semi-religious.
Oh, I feel like an old man now. So they should subscribe. And I'm on Twitter, and to be honest, you shouldn't follow me. You should follow someone else, and let them act as a filter for when I say interesting things. But I'm at Mike Bithell on Twitter.
And I am one of Moo on Twitter, and I can be a Mike Bithell filter for you if you'd like. Yeah.
That could
awesome.
Could be. That's how I want you to describe yourself in your profile.
The Mike Bithell filter. All right. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining, and hopefully see you guys again next week.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
I actually need to press the hang up button,
yes.
don't you? I've just realised. Sorry, I'm going to use that hand so I got the mouse. Bye.
No.